Okay, thank you for coming. Actually, everybody who was on the trip is here with the exception of Peter Clavel, who has some personal business that he has to take care of today. What I'd like to do is just say a few words summarizing my impressions and then just open it up to members of the delegation to briefly talk about what they perceived as the highlights of the trip for themselves. And then we'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. For my own part, this was my first trip to the Soviet Union, and I do not claim that after 10 days there I am an expert on the Soviet Union. But I did want to share just a few of my observations. The first point that I'd like to make, and I think what surprised me about the trip to the Soviet Union, is the strong degree of friendship and openness that both Soviet officials and ordinary citizens gave to us, both in Yaroslav and in the other cities. Both the officials and the people were extremely generous and warm, and I was very surprised by the degree to which, in fact, they like Americans and admire Americans. I suspect, and what we picked up from some conversations, is that this may go back to World War II, where they perceived America's help as being pivotal in the survival of their nation. And the fact that we were allies in that war meant a great deal to them. They admire our technology. They admire the advances that our society has made. And I think they admire our openness and informality as people. But in any case, I was personally surprised by the degree of openness and friendship which they expressed toward us. And of course, while we were there, the summit meeting was going on. And without exception, the people there were enthusiastic and delighted by the fact that Ronald Reagan was in Moscow. And in fact, they had many very kind words to say about Ronald Reagan himself. The other observation that I would make is that I was surprised by the degree of self-criticism which Soviet officials were prepared to make about their own society. Frankly, I thought that they would be there to tell us that everything is wonderful, and that certainly was not the case. For example, they are absolutely open in acknowledging that they are not a democratic society, and that those people we spoke to want to become a democratic society, and right now they are in the midst of an extraordinarily important and turbulent point in their history, at least some of them are, to try to determine how they go from where they are today to become a more open and democratic society. And I know that John Franco has in front of them a copy of the Moscow News, which is a publication that comes out in English, French, and a few other languages, including, I believe, Russian, which has some self-criticism and some debate, which is extraordinarily interesting and surprised many of us very much. They acknowledge, for example, that while they are proud that their health care system is free, and we went to one of their medical schools, and they're proud of that, they estimate that they are 10 or 15 years behind the United States in terms of new medical technology. They are making, at least in the Yaroslav area, significant advances in building housing. They have a major housing crisis, which they acknowledge. But they acknowledge that not only do they not have enough housing, but the construction and the quality of their housing is also not adequate. And they were very free to mention that. I think it's also fair to point out that when we were in Moscow, for example, I think most of the people here also were extremely impressed by their public transportation system. In fact, it was the cleanest, most effective mass transit system that I've ever seen in my life. They move 6 million people a day. You wait 15 seconds in rush hour between one train and another. The stations themselves were absolutely beautiful, including many works of art, chandeliers that were beautiful. It was a very, very effective system. Also, I was impressed by the youth programs that they have, their palaces of culture for the young people, a whole variety of programs for young people, and cultural programs which go far beyond what we do in this country. We went to a theater in Yaroslav, which was absolutely beautiful, had 3 separate stages where cultural programs are put on by professional actors and actresses, including a puppeteer area. And the cost, the highest price of a ticket that you can get, was the equivalent of $1.50. They put a lot of money into culture. They want people to enjoy it, and they deserve credit for that. The other point that I would make is that right now, in the Soviet Union, there is an extraordinary debate going on. And at the end of this month, they're going to be having their 19th all-party conference with 5,000 people coming from throughout their country. It's the first such meeting that they've had since 1941, when they planned out their strategy on how to fight World War II. And right now, that debate will determine, to my mind, the future of their country. And at least some of the people that we met, from some of their lips, I was very impressed by their desire to become a democratic society and to move forward into some of the early visions of their revolution, what their revolution was about in 1917. They understand that they have had, in many ways, a dismal history since then, and they want to go back to some of their early visions, and we certainly wish them well in that. Lastly, my discussions with the mayor of Yaroslav, a gentleman named Alexander Ryabkov, were very warm. He is a very, very pleasant man. My hope is that he and other people from Yaroslav will be visiting us in late September or early October. We are in the process of going through the paperwork right now. They want a sister city relationship. And the process is that they have to go through their own bureaucracy in Moscow. I think it's going to happen. We can't be 100% sure. I think it is going to happen. I think if it does happen, it'll be an extraordinary thing for both cities. And my last point is, we have a tape, which we'll try to get out as soon as we can, of a 15-minute interview that the mayor of Yaroslav and I did. Okay, that's the end of my remarks. Who wants to jump in next?
Just go down.
Alan, do you want to introduce yourself, Alan?
I'm Alan Rubin. I was the physician representative of the group. And I agree with the mayor. I can't agree more with the surprise of the civility and the kindness of the people we met. I feel like we met our counterparts.
A little bit louder.
I felt more comfortable with those people than any other European country I'd been in. I felt like I'd found cousins or uncles or grandparents there. They treated us, royally is probably the wrong word, but they treated us very, very, very well. I was awestruck and touched. I was also surprised by my own feelings of warmth toward the people I met and how they stuck with us. I'd read a lot about the instant friendships that Americans have found over the years. That is, they'd meet people for one day and then not see them again. We really felt differently. We felt like these relationships would last, and I'd like to emphasize how important I think it is for all of us in the city as a whole to pursue fully the sister city relationship.
I'm Howard Seaver. I'm a lawyer here in Burlington, and I've also been active for a number of years in the Lake Champlain Regional Chamber of Commerce, and I'm, I guess, now chairman of the Chamber's International Trade Committee. I found some things that I expected and some things that surprised me. I guess my overall impression was that Soviet society to me seemed like the flip side of our society. We put our resources in private hands, and people here have nice houses and cars and clothes and consumer goods. There they seem to put their resources into public facilities, and what I saw there was a transportation system in the big cities and public parks and recreation facilities in Yaroslav that really, in my view, surpassed what we have here. On the other hand, the goods in their shops are shabby, and their housing construction is also not up to our standards by any means. I was also surprised by the freedom of movement that we had, particularly in the larger cities, Moscow and Leningrad. Members of our group at various times just broke away from the tour bus. There were no restrictions placed on us. It didn't seem to be a problem for the government tour guide. And we went off essentially on our own in groups of 2s and 3s and 4s. And we used the subway system, taxis, buses on our own, without any feeling that anybody was hindering us or watching us, to the extent that some of us even met in an apartment for several hours with people who were unhappy with the system, with a couple of Jewish young men who were interested in emigrating, and one had applied to emigrate. and also met on our own that was in Moscow, and met on our own, some of us, with a family in Leningrad, and had some number of pickup conversations on the streets and buses and subways with people. I was also interested and a little bit surprised by what I heard from the business end there. That was my particular interest, and I met in Yaroslav with people who represented the largest industry in that community, which was an engine factory that employed about 50,000 people. And what they told me was that in the past, in order for a manufacturing entity in the Soviet Union to do business with a foreign company, they had to go through a central government ministry, but that the rules have changed, and that currently the plant manager in that city would have the authority on his own to enter into a deal with a U.S. or another Western firm. And that really surprised me. They seemed very interested in doing business with us. The problem is that they have a shortage of hard currency, and they're looking for deals of a nature that don't involve them putting up hard currency going in. So there are only a certain range of types of arrangements that they're particularly interested in. But if there's interest on this side in those kinds of arrangements, they were very excited about the possibility of setting up some kind of trade, and felt that they had the authority at that level to enter into the arrangement. Because I have a number of other thoughts too, but I'll just pass to John at this point.
I'm John Franco. This was my second trip to the Soviet Union. I went in 1986. And two things stick out most in my mind. First of all, the incredible beauty of the city of Yaroslav. We couldn't have a better sister city anywhere. It's an incredibly beautiful city. The pace of life and the feel of life is very similar to Burlington. And if we can get a waterfront half as beautiful as the one they have in Yaroslav, we'll be doing very well. But the other thing that really struck me was the effect that perestroika is having in the political climate of the country. And the difference was very pronounced even from 2 years ago. When we flew from Moscow to Leningrad the first weekend we were there, we picked up a copy of this newspaper called Moscow News. And we were frankly flabbergasted at the level of debate and criticism that's going on in this newspaper about their society. For example, this issue here has a variety of articles and opinions ranging on the faults of the Soviet economy to the faults of Soviet education. In fact, the article on Soviet education states that the Soviet education to this date had produced a generation which had grown up in an atmosphere of reversible lies. And if perestroika fails, the USSR will become a society of talkative idlers, passive cynics, and infantile parasites obeying only the whip. This is the level of debate that's beginning to emerge now in the Soviet Union. And what's very clear and very exciting is that there's a real opportunity for that society to become a true democracy. And the other thing that was apparent to me, that the entity that really holds the trump card in whether or not perestroika is successful and whether or not democracy in the Soviet Union is successful is the United States of America. If we continue a belligerent and Cold War attitude toward the USSR, I fear that the Stalinist hacks in the Soviet bureaucracy, which are everywhere, will succeed in getting Gorbachev out and strangling perestroika, and then their society will go back to the dictatorship that they've suffered for the last 70 years.
My name is Jim Dunn. I'm also an attorney, and after a while you end up echoing what other people are saying. To some extent, I'd like to just indicate my impressions. The beauty of the city is one that I have to note. Peter Clavel and I took the opportunity early in the morning to run along the Volga River. The city sits up above the river, and it is a phenomenally beautiful place. Many people out running in the morning, fishing along the Volga River, and I think all of us were struck by its absolutely astounding beauty. Also, in terms of the changing times, I think we all came away with a sense of a phenomenal change taking place at all different levels. We met with some intellectuals in Moscow who our advisors at the highest level of government. We were very fortunate to have this meeting. The mayor arranged it. And we learned, firsthand a number of the major concerns that people are dealing with as they go through this agonizing change. It was described as a shedding of the shell that they had been in, and it was going to happen. It was evolutionary, and the direction that it was going to go was what really was being debated, not really whether it was going to go forward or not. In Yaroslav, we had the opportunity to meet with some of our counterparts in the legal system, which we found very interesting. We met with an attorney, a couple of attorneys. We talked about a wide range of legal issues. They brought us to court one day, the equivalent of the district court, if you would, in Burlington. We sat through a DWI trial, which we found to be extremely similar. They had breath tests and percentage of alcohol issues that are raised here. After that ended, we went behind the scenes and we spoke with the judges. By the way, there are 3 judges, 2 of whom are elected by the people, very similar to what we have here in the state of Vermont. These kinds of similarities, I think, highlighted for me the essence of, I guess, what I came away with in terms of the secret to attaining world peace, and that is really that people need to meet each other. If they could meet each other and talk to one another, I think that the world really could live in peace.
My name is Jenny Green. I'm a student at Burlington High School. My name is Jenny Green. I'm a student at Burlington High School. I was in the Soviet Union in November with Project Harmony. So it was my 2nd time there, and the same things struck me as being true, mostly about people that most people that we ran into were very curious and eager to talk to us. And like Jim said, that you really need to talk to the people and get to know them. And that if you're there and you're willing to speak, there was no end of people that were willing to do the same. And again, it's a beautiful city, really, I think, appropriate to be matched up with Burlington. Feels the same.
I'm Jane Sanders, Director of the Youth Office, and as Jim said, we're echoing each other. The city was beautiful. We were astounded with the openness, the optimism, the enthusiasm in the nation. We had, I think the things that struck me the most were the way that they dealt with children and with the cultural life of their community. As Howard mentioned, they put the money into public facilities, and they have palaces of culture which are paid for strictly by trade union dues, and those places have movies and dances and a lot of artistic outlets for people. For instance, they might become members of an orchestra and study to play an instrument and perform. And when they go off on performances, it's seen not as something that they are doing on their own and they need to take vacation time from work, but it's seen as providing, contributing to the community life. So that becomes part of their work. Instead of, the thing that struck me is instead of compartmentalizing their lives into a job and hobbies, it's all interrelated, and it's all under the banner of community involvement. We got a chance to meet with some teachers and the head of education in Yaroslav, and I was impressed with how eager they were to have student exchanges and teacher exchanges. Instead of hesitating, they would say, well, 2 years ago, it would not have been possible. Now we're sure that we can do it, and we've set up even tentative dates. They're interested in coming over on Kids Day next year and having a group of students from here go there and study in their schools and live in their homes for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and their students doing the same over here. One of the things that has already been mentioned was that we need to understand each other more. And one visit that we took as a group that was quite compelling was at the Leningrad Cemetery. And we learned about the siege at Leningrad during World War II. And some of us were familiar with it to an extent, but it was a very moving tour, if you can call it that. When I met with the teachers, we talked about studying history and exchanging maybe 3 to 5 topics. We decided that students there from the 4th to 10th grade will study the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the siege at Leningrad starting in September. And I will try to arrange for that to happen here, and we will exchange those things. So the main thing is communication and getting to know one another. It was quite an eye-opening trip.
I'm Beth Phillips, and I'm the children's librarian at Fletcher Free Library. I was really struck by the enormous interest and curiosity of Russians about us, and people stopping us in the street or in squares and just wanting to talk, to practice their English and find out what the real scoop was on the United States. Before I left, I did a fair amount of preparation and reading, and really viewed the journey as a culmination of my preparations. Now that I'm back, I see the journey as just the very beginning of a wonderful friendship.
It's hard for me to be brief because there are so many things to say, but with so many people here, and you probably have questions, I will try to be. I was the member of the group who spoke Russian the best. A couple people spoke a little bit here and there, but I was actually able to talk with people, strangers on the street, taxi drivers, university students, and so on. And I have to echo the basic conclusion that I think everybody in the group came to, which is that Russians as a people are incredibly friendly. They are more willing to talk to strangers than any of us would have imagined. The hospitality we were shown was staggering. The taxi driver who sang to us for the half-hour taxi ride and then refused to take any money from us at the end because he liked us. The university students who heard us speaking English and wanted to practice their English and met us on 3 different occasions at different locations and came back to our hotel. And just the level of changes that are going on in that country, where a few years ago, those students that came back to our hotel would have been unwilling to go into the building because to go into a tourist hotel was an indication that either you had foreign currency to spend, which you must have gotten on the black market, or maybe you were somehow suspect. But this year, while a couple of them were sort of like, I'm not sure if we should go in there with you, others said, why not? It's legal. Let's do it. And this new sense of freedom that they were having was striking. The Stalinist fears are not gone. Stalin is held up in their newspapers and so on as being one of the worst criminals against humanity in history. The evils of Brezhnev are being revealed. But overall, I would say that what we experienced there was, we felt like we were in the midst of history being made, revolutionary, really, not in the sense of a revolutionary new toothpaste, but of changing the way that human beings relate to other human beings in the world. We saw a lot of things that were beautiful and wonderful. We saw a lot of things that were shabby and stupid, very much like the United States. Different things were stupid, different things were wonderful. That's what made it very interesting. The fact that people pay approximately 2 to 5% of their income on rents, that healthcare is free, that education is free. There are after-school programs for all the children, whether it's horseback riding or karate or chess or dance or whatever. The commitment to the arts and children is staggering. On the other hand, if you wanted to make a gourmet meal and you wanted to go to get some fresh produce, you'd have a choice of green cabbage, beets, onions, leeks, apples. That's the choice that you had that day, and you had to wait in line quite a while just to get one of those items. The priority is not put on consumerism or the ability to get products efficiently and easily and to have the variety that we are accustomed to. In that sense, it is definitely not a rich country. In other areas, such as the cultural programs, the transportation, etc., it is just light years ahead of this country. On total, I guess I'd say I'd rather live here. But I am very, very excited about what's going on in that country. And I just wanted to conclude by saying the Leningrad Memorial we visited, I think, was probably one of the more moving experiences of my life. Most Americans forget that part of the history of World War II. The Soviets lost more people killed by famine and starvation and bombs due to the Nazis in that one city than all of the Americans who died in the entire war. That one city lost over 500,000 people. 600,000 or 700,000 people buried in mass graves. We looked at the diary of a little girl who lived in Leningrad at the time, talking, on this page it says, today my mother died. A few pages later, my brother died. A few pages later, my cousin died. And finally, after several pages, nobody's left but me. And there was not a dry eye in anybody in the museum. And then this memorial where you see these mounds of earth where literally nearly over 500,000 people died in a very, very short amount of time. And when people over there talk about the need for peace, it's not an intellectual thing as it is for a lot of people here, because their country has been invaded so many times, their soil has been conquered so many times, and there's nobody in the Soviet Union who does not have a relative who died in the World War II. That when they talk about peace, and everybody we met did talk about the need for friendship and peace with the United States. It was a very heartfelt plea for peace. I've a lot else I could say, but I won't right now.
I'm Michelle Weiss. I'm the assistant city clerk. I mean, the first thing that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about was the issue about peace. I didn't know what to expect in going to the Soviet Union, and I think that was the key thing. I mean, what is this war about? In meeting people and realizing how much they're just like we are, it just didn't make sense. And it also felt like we were each other's counterpart, like keeping separate. We were like denying each other information that both of our nations need. That there was a way that the things that they did really well around, after-school programs for children were things that we really need to know more about, and the things that we do really well in terms of, housing and the market would be real useful for them to have. So coming away with, all right, let's do it. And also hearing some things that came out of that meeting with the intellectuals, the think tank for the political government. Some of the things that were coming out of there were, astonishing in terms of where we can go as a human nation, as a world nation, in terms of our two countries setting a model for, peace between us, and also, ending world hunger. That if our two nations can come to, an agreement with each other, that it's limitless the kinds of things that we can do as a world. I wanted to talk some about the language barrier, because it was, in the Soviet Union, like in any European country, people learn English, they learn, German and French, they learn more languages, and it's something that I would really like to see happen more in the United States. That's something that's needed even more than anything, towards promoting peaceful relationships, that our country should take an effort to, learn Russian so that we can, deepen our friendships. And in terms of what Terry just said a minute ago about, I would much rather live here. I just read an article in Parents Magazine where the author said, yeah, when it, push comes to shove, I would rather live here. But in terms of where I want my children to live, I'm not sure. And I left feeling like that. I left feeling like, oh, I want this education. I want to know all of this that I don't have a handle on yet. It was quite opening. I think that all of us have been changed by this experience.
My name's David Kelley, and I come to this from, I think, a much different perspective than anybody else on the trip. I've been to the Soviet Union 6 times. I've lived there for several months, and I'm certainly the only Republican in this group. I think that the thing that I agree with that was said the most is what Terry Bouricius said. I think the changes are truly revolutionary, and I think that they're primarily inspired by Mikhail Gorbachev, who is a man of extraordinary common sense. But I would add to that there is no guarantee of his success or his future. And the Soviet Union is not a democracy. It's more like a large corporation, and it doesn't have the public interest always at the close to its heart. My very best friends can't come visit me here in Vermont. It breaks their heart and it breaks my heart. But the country is going through incredible changes. And our country, unfortunately, is responding at the grassroots with a groundswell like this, with Democrats and socialists and Republicans, but there's no intelligent political response on our part in the U.S. Congress to the changes taking place in the Soviet Union. What we need to do is everything we can at this moment to seize the time and stabilize our relationship. We need to repeal the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. We need to tear down the barriers we've created to trade. We need to offer most favored nation status. We need to get the Soviet Union involved in the general agreement on trade and tariffs. We need to get them into the International Monetary Fund. And we need to do the same thing the Europeans did after World War II. We need to normalize our trade relationship, create economic interdependence, and do everything we can to allow for the freest possible flow of products, people, and ideas. And the United States Congress isn't doing that. And I think what projects like this can do is begin to put pressure, not just for local action, but for federal congressional action to create a more intelligent, common sense relationship.
Okay, questions?
Talked about the peace. We all understand that there's a need for peace. But I think what I want to know, and perhaps other people in the city of Burlington want to know, and I think Jim came the closest to telling us what exactly you did there. You talked about being an attorney and going to the court system. I mean, as a student, what did you do? Did you get to see the education? As a librarian, did you get to go into a library? Tell me more about that, and if you could tell me who's going to answer, that would also be nice.
Well, on some occasions, we all went together.
Right.
On other occasions, different people went to different places. Jim and John and Howard and David, I guess, went to the courthouse. Jane and Beth, I believe, and Jenny went to a school. Who would you like to answer?
Tell me about the school.
In the school, we were greeted. One of the things that was interesting was when we went there, there was a tour set up for us, and at the last minute we asked that the lawyers meet in the courthouses and the people, and we meet with the schools. They set it up on a moment's notice. We were greeted by the principal and several members of the staff. Unfortunately, it's the end of the school year. There's another group that went to another school, and they can tell you a little bit more about that.
So
we went to the classrooms. They showed us their history books, their language books. They talked very openly about things that they wanted to do. We had a half hour, and within that small span of time, we decided on student exchanges that we felt that we could make at least in this coming year, at least 2. We hoped that we could have an English teacher from here come and teach English, not just to the students, but to the teachers there, and a Russian teacher from their school come to Burlington and teach our children. We agreed on having those 3 topics where we study a little bit more about each other as our history and exchanging that. We talked about different ways that we could learn from each other in terms of who's ahead in math and English and different science things. As I said, we only had a half an hour, but I think that if you walked into a school with an hour's notice and met with the principal and the faculty and said, what can we do in half an hour, and we would not have accomplished that much. There was another group that went into a school that without any notice, and I think you should hear from them, and that was when school was in session.
Well, I was in that group. Other people were too. But I just want to say, school was out of session when we were there. I mean, it's their summertime too. So, actually, they were taking exams at that point. So we didn't get to see classrooms. But when we did, we were walking along the street and we saw a school and said, oh, let's go in. So we took some steps and just, walked right into the school and told them who we were, and we were greeted like, oh, come on in, we'll show you around. And I think what was most exciting about that is we were not only met with the teachers, but the students were there also to show us around, and they were dressed in work clothes for that day. And I guess in reading some about it, there aren't any janitors in the school, that the children are all part of the staff that maintains the building. So that's what they were doing that day. They showed us their newspaper, up on the wall, which was, it was, beautiful. I have some videos of that too that at some point I'll, pull together so people can see it.
These things, though, give me an idea of what a sister-city relationship can do, and I think that's what most people want to know. I mean, we all understand that peace through meeting people, but what exactly can a sister-city relationship do? And these are the type of things that I would like to know more about.
Can I?
Let's have WCAX exchange. Let's do it. Simple.
It's simple.
Let me pick
Yes,
up
we
on that
talked
point. In all
about it.
seriousness, for
Yeah.
those of you who are in the media, we did speak to some of the people in the media, and I think that they would be up for a media exchange. So now all you have to do is talk to your employers and have them send you that. But I think we can work out something in that respect.
And short of that, the possibility of simply exchanging recorded news items, news articles, radio programs, TV programs. The formats are different for the video and so on, but I think that they can be changed to the appropriate format for each country and so on. But those kinds of things, which are relatively less expensive, it's a lot cheaper to send tape than to send human beings. Those kinds of exchanges we can proceed with. We already have the first radio interview conducted in the Soviet Union of the mayor of Yaroslav and Bernie Sanders conducting the interview.
Okay, we also have probably 8 or 10 hours of tape, which will be edited. We intend to do a special meeting of the Board of Aldermen to review the trip, and the tape will be made available. Did other people want to comment to Natalie's question?
I'll make a comment. We visited the medical school there. They really weren't interested in hearing what we had to say about how wonderful the Soviet healthcare system was, but they were very interested in knowing how we do it here, especially how we train physicians in Vermont, how we supply physicians for a rural state. They're interested in our technology, our teaching methods, our standards, and they're very interested in continuing that relationship with exchanges on just how we do it and what they can learn from us.
What's the bottom line on this thing? Are we going to have a sister-city relationship or not? And if the answer to that is no, wouldn't that be kind of a slap in the face? Is there any question left about this?
The officials of Yaroslav, in my view, very much want to have a sister-city relationship. And what has to happen now is a formal process has to be undertaken, which in fact goes to Moscow before approval is granted. Our expectation is that in fact that will happen, that we will have a sister-city program. We're shooting for late September, early October to have a delegation from Yaroslav over here. So I think the odds are pretty good that it's going to happen. But the nature of the process for the Soviet Union is such they could not say, yup, we have the sister city program, we'll sign on the dotted line. There's got a process has got to continue. We're going to do our best to expedite the process. I should point out that there are, I believe, between 15 or 20 sister city programs now with cities in the Soviet Union. We are on a very, very fast track. We've been at this for something like 6 months. There are some cities, David, correct me if I'm wrong, that take several years.
Dallas has taken a couple of years. Boston has floundered for several years. And I'm almost certain we'll have a sister-city relationship. It has to be approved by the Supreme Soviet.
So one little thing about that, just a few seconds. We met with the person who was our translator when we were in the city, besides Ludmila, who was with us the whole time, was a fellow named Sasha, who is the deputy mayor in charge of international relations for their city. They have a 2-person department, full-time job, whose job it is for their city dealing with international relations. They have sister cities in France, Finland, and West Germany. I think it was West Germany.
Portugal as well.
And Portugal.
And their job is to do full-time to work on the sister city relationship with these cities.
What I want to know is who's going to pay for a lot of these exchanges. We talk about winning teachers.
And one of the issues that has yet to be resolved is that once we establish this, if we are successful in the program, how do we raise the necessary funds to make sure that this program will work? We don't know the answer to that. It's going to take a lot of community support, and I think some public support as well. But there's an
Enormous amount of work that has to be done. I think one of the things that we were all talking about on the plane as we came back is how are we going to show them the hospitality that they have shown us. But there's a lot of work yet to be done. And I think the other part of it, of course, is not just welcoming a delegation and signing a piece of paper. It's the real hard work. My gut feeling, as Alan indicated, when we went to the medical school, is those physicians, they would give their right arm to come over here for short-term periods, for long-term periods. It's going to take a lot of work to work out a physician exchange program, a teacher exchange program. Howard Siva had the opportunity of meeting with some of their trade people. It is not easy, but that's something I think all of us are sympathetic to doing.
We could talk talk about tax dollars, or would we try to raise private funds for this?
I think at this point it's premature to say, but my gut feeling is there probably should be a combination of public and private funding.
If I could just add, too, what they indicated to us in terms of the protocol is that assuming they come here and we establish this relationship, they, with their other sister cities, set up what they call a 2-year program of exchanges. They operate on a 2-year basis. So I think if we're successful, then we will sit down and discuss and agree upon some form of interchanges during that 2-year period.
One of the other things they pointed out was non-currency exchanges are the way to go. They're open now, whereas they weren't a couple of years ago, to have people stay in their homes. So people would be able to come here and stay in homes here, and it would not really cost much more than the airfare.
I'd like to just to follow up on something that Andy said. My impression with the officials in Yaroslav was that they are very, very serious about a sister city relationship. This is not, they don't intend any kind of flash in the pan relationship. They want to establish a real sister city relationship that has ongoing contacts at a variety of levels.
What was the reaction over there to people, be they political or whatever, when they realized that they were meeting with, we got 2 politicians here, elected officials who are socialists or who both have publicly stated that part of their political foundation is not the key point, is acceptance and belief in the Marxist class analysis of society as a starting point. Were they surprised to find that coming from an American mayor, an American alderman?
I can say one thing about that. We didn't discuss that in any detail. I mean, I don't know if they were surprised or not. They didn't really express it. But one day I was wearing a T-shirt, which is something that the CASA, the local Central American Solidarity Group in Burlington, printed up a few years ago, which says, Burlington celebrates the 5th anniversary of the Nicaraguan Revolution. And one of these Russians saw that. She broke out laughing, because to her it was like having a T-shirt saying Moscow celebrates the anniversary of the Mujahideen Afghanistan rebels. It's like, what? How can you be from America and have a T-shirt that says that? And she thought it was hysterically funny. And then they began to realize, yeah, I guess Burlington is not like Reagan, or is not, they didn't use the word Reagan, is not typical. There was an awareness that Burlington may not be exactly like every other town, stereotype image, but they did not make a big distinction like Burlington is special and unique. It's like, we were Americans. The political stripes would say, well, this person's a Democrat, this person's a Republican, this progressive coalition. Is sort of like, so what? You're Americans, right? It's like, that was the overriding thing. I mean, our political stripes were of relatively minor significance.
I would agree with that, Peter. They didn't seem to be too interested in it. They seemed to pretty much lump us together. And if anything, they treated that little difference as kind of humorous. And there were a couple of chuckles about it, but it was not a big deal to them. They saw us, I think, as pretty much the same. I guess one thing that I'd like to add also, I'm listening to the other comments, and most of the comments have been pretty positive, and I guess I'm sitting here thinking that probably a part of the reason why our comments are probably fairly positive is because many of us probably went there with very negative impressions. It's not that the Soviet Union is such a wonderful place. It's got, Lord knows, it's got a lot of problems, but it was a better place at least than I thought it was going to be. I've lived for some time in a third world country, and it's not one of those. It's not the United States, but it's not a third world country. You don't see people in dire poverty there. And it wasn't a totally gray kind of a place as I had kind of pictured it. So I think that a part of our reaction is just surprise at finding things to be more positive than what we thought they were.
I think, to answer Peter's question, it's obviously hard to know how they reacted to us as opposed to other Americans. I don't know. But in my discussions with the mayor and others, I think the fact that we were willing to be critical of the United States, I was asked the question about Nicaragua, for example, and gave my point of view. I think that made them maybe more appreciative of the criticisms we made of their own society. We weren't there, and again, I can't speak for all Americans that go there saying, hey, America is perfect, no problem, look at all of your problems. But what we were saying, yeah, in our country, we also have a housing crisis. Our housing in general is better than yours, but people are paying 40% of their income for housing. The quality of your housing is not good, but we appreciate the fact that people are paying 5%. The quality of your health care, we understand, is not good. But in the United States, believe me, we have enormous problems in terms of our health care system. So I think that that might have, brought about a little bit more congeniality, because we were there to say, yeah, we have problems, you have problems. There are strengths to your system, there are strengths to our system. And as I think Beth and maybe Michelle pointed out, our goal was let's take the strengths of both systems. Let's learn from each other and see if through increased cooperation and understanding, we can improve upon what's strong in both of our systems and do away with what's weak in both of our systems.
I have a question that maybe David or John could answer. What are people saying, or how do people feel? What sense did you get of the whole fact that with perestroika and the restructuring, so that there's a sort of moving away from the state owning everything to cooperatives and even private enterprise, is there any concern about increased stratification?
That's a good question. Does anyone?
Could I answer it?
Sure.
It's changed since I was there the last time. Most of the people I talked to were very cynical, and I've tried to stay in touch with the same people each time I go back. At first, they were very cynical, and especially working class people said, we work harder, we get paid the same, or we pretend to work, they pretend to pay us. My friends who were students would say, well, why should we get excited? It's the Soviet system. It blows this way one day, that way the next. First we have Khrushchev, then we have Brezhnev, then we have Chernenko. And this time it was different. The people I spoke to, who I've tried to stay in touch with, are more hopeful than they've ever been before that the changes are real. And I think the single most important fact is there are things like youth exchange happening where between 1926 and 1986, no Soviet teenagers in groups, except for the few children of diplomats, were allowed to visit the United States. Now they read Leningrad Pravda, and they can see the kids from Leningrad going to the United States. They can see the kids from Tbilisi going to the United States, and they believe that all of the boundaries are starting to come down. No one knows the limits, and no one's quite sure how far to push it with free speech, with travel, with economic free enterprise, but they like it and they believe it's real.
David, is there any fear associated with that in terms of, I'm talking really about the internal economic structure?
The greatest fear is among the bureaucracy itself.
Let me just say something, John, because I asked exactly that question at the meeting that we had with the Canadian American people. And that was exactly the question that somebody asked. And first of all, the answer was, they mentioned that they are developing cooperatives all over the place, and they said that with excitement and pride. They thought that that was a very positive thing. And the question came up, okay, what happens if one of these cooperatives really succeeds and somebody starts making all kinds of bucks? What does this mean to your social system? Their first response was that at the present moment, above a certain level, people are allowed to accumulate a certain amount from their work in the cooperative. But above that, the tax rate is, if my memory is correct, something like 93%. And we said, and then they felt that that in fact was too high. That was too high, they're going to have to work on that. And we raised the question, well, what happens if somebody becomes a successful businessman? Do you want millionaires in the Soviet Union? And the truth was, and I was really disarmed perhaps by their response was, you know what, that's a good question. We haven't resolved that. We don't know the answer to that question yet. That's something we're working on right now. We don't know. That's what they said.
Debbie, I think the concern that you're raising is one that is raised dishonestly by frankly, the party hacks at the middle level that want to smother perestroika. The concern that I came across was not a fear that we would retreat to capitalism, but rather that perestroika would be smothered. And it would be crushed. The way, I mean, how many times has it happened before, not only in the Soviet Union, but in Eastern Europe? And there's a very real sense of the people that they really are very hopeful that perestroika will happen, but on the other hand, you get the sense that maybe it's still good to be true. And a lot of folks are not getting their hopes up too much. So then you read in the paper like Moscow News, if we have the attitude of don't get your hopes up too much, then the party hacks will be successful because we will have censored ourselves and will not have allowed this new openness to blossom. So that's really what they're grappling with. But the fear is not that somebody's going to make a few more bucks than the others. The fear is the bureaucrats, both in the party and in the state apparatus, that they're just going to, I think they said they're going to greet the perestroika with a bear embrace and crush it.
It sounds like what you're saying is that that's not really an issue right now, that people feel that they still have so far to go, and they're so worried about the sort of...
All that I can tell you is their immediate response to that question is, we don't know the answer to that at this time.
Which is not to say, if I could add, I was at this meeting with the mayor as well, and I think that, I guess I would disagree a little bit with John. It is a major issue at the intellectual level of what's the next step. These people were dealing now with the issue of that you're raising. You know, what if and how do we prevent a class structure and yet provide incentive and provide imagination? And that's one of the cutting edges they do not have the answers to, but they are working at it.
High hopes and slow delivery are very dangerous. I think it's like the United States in the 60s after the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the explosion in the inner city. I think that the Soviets face similar problems, that they're raising hope, the delivery is slow, and after it has sunk in that this isn't changed, the expectations may be higher than justified.
Did anybody you met, was anyone familiar with Vermont? When you said you're from Vermont, they said, oh, yeah, Solzhenitsyn, right?
Yes, one person did.
Yes, Terry and
one
I were
person
on the
did say
Orbach.
Solzhenitsyn.
Yes, he knew. His wife was friends with Solzhenitsyn's wife, and we had a good conversation with him on the Arbat, which is their marketplace in Moscow, and we have a painting showing.
And also that happened when we met 3 students at Leningrad University, and they had made the connection between Solzhenitsyn and
I saw 2 people with Ben and Jerry's T-shirts.
But they didn't know what the T-shirts meant.
One was a Soviet, but one was from Montreal.
And I think we're all here to make a strong prediction.
And
The people in the Soviet Union love ice cream, and that Ben & Jerry's is going to make a fortune. Okay, I think one of the things, and maybe we'll conclude now, unless there's some other questions, is we are going to have a special meeting of the Board of Aldermen, and hopefully we'll have some tapes to go with that. And I think also, out of this renewed interest in the Soviet Union, I would hope that there'll be some symposiums sponsored by the city, getting people with different points of view to talk about the impact of glasnost and perestroika. Okay? Good. Thank you.